Welcome to the CDA Institute's Geopolitical Update. I'm Josh Malm, Director of Research and Analysis for the Institute, and I'm joined by geopolitical expert Joseph Varner, Deputy Director of the Conference of Defense Associations, and former Director of Policy for the Minister of National Defense. In this podcast, Joe will provide his analysis and insights on the most significant geopolitical and international security developments of the week. So grab your headphones and get ready for a concise but comprehensive update on the world's most pressing geopolitical issues. The CDA Institute encourages rigorous debate on national security matters through our events, research, and publications.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Geopolitical Update. Thanks for tuning in. I'm here with Joseph Varner, our resident geopolitical expert. He's the Deputy Director of the CDA. Joe, how are you doing today, and what stories are we going to be focusing on?
I'm great today, Josh. And the stories that I think we should focus on is that are of particular interest are China's ever-growing sea power and its ICBM launch and growing conflict in the Middle East.
So, Joe, why don't we start with China? Let's have a rundown of what's been happening in the region lately.
It's been an interesting week for naval gazing. People that are interested in sea power are watching probably the best growing sign of China and the People's Liberation Army's Navy's sea power in a long time. And that demonstration has seen three Chinese aircraft carriers at sea at the same time. And of the three carriers involved in these activities, the Liaoning and the Shandong are now well established within the Chinese Navy, whereas its newest, the Wuzhong, the country's first domestically produced aircraft carrier, is still preparing for operational service. But all three have been at sea. And it's interesting because not only have they been at sea, but they're also talking about all three being equipped with China's newest stealth aircraft, the J-35, that has been described as superior to its American counterparts. And these exercises came at the same time we saw three Chinese icebreakers head up to the Arctic off the coast of Alaska, moving around to assert China's near Arctic state view of itself. As well, we've seen the Philippine Navy report at the same time a large presence of Chinese vessels in the Philippine Sea. We've seen to date about 251 Chinese Coast Guard ships, People's Liberation Army Navy, and Chinese maritime militia staging in the West Philippine Sea to try and force the Philippines out of its own exclusive economic zone. And right now, there are something like 16 Chinese warships, 28 Coast Guard vessels, and 204 Chinese maritime militia vessels that are really pushing on the Philippines and other neighbors in the South China Sea to force them out of the region, which China has claimed as its own waterway. It's kind of Chinese lake. And you're also seeing Chinese naval vessels engage with the Russians in the waters off Japan and in the adjacent waters to Russia and China in joint war games, which is also spooking neighbors, particularly the South Koreans and the Japanese.
Thanks for that update, Joe. Maybe we can move to the Middle East. I believe a lot's been happening since we last spoke.
Yes, I mean, I think in terms of the Middle East, with Gaza now largely under wraps and the Israeli Defense Forces, or IDF, mopping up, Israel has turned its attention to the north and Hezbollah, and by extension, Iran. The U.S. and France are attempting to get a 21-day ceasefire to conclude hostage negotiations in the Gaza Strip with Hamas. But Israel has now rejected that ceasefire proposal. And Hamas has never given up its maximalist demands with Israel, which means that Israel will never agree. And so what we're now seeing is the IDF have been defanging, for lack of a better word, Hezbollah in the north, and now are preparing for a ground incursion to push Hezbollah back from the border beyond the Litani River, which would be in accordance with the UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which has been on the books since 2006 but never been implemented. And so you're likely going to see the continuation of Israel's air campaign against Hezbollah. You're going to see Hezbollah fire rockets and missiles at Israel, and you're probably going to see an Israeli ground incursion into Lebanon to push Hezbollah back. And that's probably where we're going to see things go in the Middle East, unless, of course, Iran directly intervenes now to help Hezbollah, which they seem to be reluctant to do at this stage. It's been an interesting week. We've watched China launch its first intercontinental ballistic missile for a test since about 2005. I think they launched the DF-5 ICBM. In this case, it looks like they tested a missile that fell into the Pacific Ocean near French Polynesia. And the type of missile and its flight path are still a little bit unclear. But by pictures and photographic evidence, it would suggest that they tested a Dongfeng 31AG, third generation long range road mobile, 3-stage solid fuel ICBM with an estimated range of about 8,000 kilometers. And that kind of ICBM can carry upwards of 590 kiloton warheads. And China, now has a nuclear arsenal deployed of about 500 nuclear warheads, and will likely have more than 1,000 by 2030. So to see a Chinese ICBM test for the first time since 2005 has been significant. And another story that's worth watching is that for the first time we've seen a Chinese naval destroyer pass through the Taiwan Strait to lay down its marker with China, and it went through with Australian and New Zealand warships. And this comes on the heels of repeated Chinese incursions into Japanese territory. And now for the first time, we've seen the Japanese kind of poke the Chinese in the eye and actually sail the Taiwan Strait. And that's going to be worth watching in the next few months, how that develops. And as well, Vladimir Putin has announced changes in Russian nuclear doctrine as a further warning to the West not to allow Ukraine to use long-range Western weapons to strike targets in Russia proper. And so President Vladimir Putin said on Wednesday that Russia could use nuclear weapons if it was attacked by any state, and that any conventional attack on Russia that was supported by a nuclear power, i.e. the United States, France, and Great Britain, would be considered to be a joint attack on Russia if they were using those countries' weapons to strike Russian targets proper.
Joe, thank you once again for your insightful analysis and for guiding us through this week's geopolitical developments. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in once again. Be sure to check us out next week as we reconvene with Joe to delve into another week of global affairs. Thank you, everyone.